think it's finally working. Sorry about the delay, and thanks for joining me. Okay, party conference should have been in Kirkcaldy, and other people would do the organising and the technology, and this time I've had to do it myself, so I screwed it up for the first 10 minutes. Sorry about that. Thanks for tuning in, yeah, as I said, we should have been in Kirkcaldy this weekend for our party conference. And as soon as the outbreak began, it was pretty clear that that wasn't going to happen. Couldn't happen, shouldn't happen. And yeah, it's been distressing to see that we weren't able to do that. I should have been in front of hundreds of Green Party activists and members and supporters. And instead, I'm here in my flat in Partick, speaking to a single unblinking camera eye and struggling with the technology. We should have been talking about our achievements this year, winning free bus travel for young people, our plans for the time ahead, planning for the climate conference in Glasgow later this year, talking about a whole host of ways to hold the Scottish Government to account for its actions. And instead, we're coping with events that are unprecedented. It's really difficult to overstate the scale of the events that we're living through at the moment and the impact that it's having on all of our lives. That impact will be different for different people. If you have decent, secure housing, it's probably easier to cope than if you're in somewhere that's insecure, you don't know if you're going to be able to stay where you are, or overcrowded, or just poor conditions. If you've got access to food, to quality food, and a freezer to store it in, it's easier to cope than if you don't. If you have caring responsibilities, that's an extra challenge for people. If you have an insecure income or an employer who isn't behaving as responsibly as they should, all of these things will change what this experience of lockdown is like for people. I hope that everyone is safe and healthy and well, and that you're coping with this experience of lockdown as best you can. It isn't easy. And not everyone is safe and supported in their home environment. So since this whole situation began, the Scottish Greens have been focused on what we can do to try and support the most vulnerable, the people who are going to need government and other agencies and services to back them up and to look after their interests. Ross Greer's work on school meals, looking at the expectation that we knew was coming that schools would close in time, and the need to ensure that those children and young people who rely on free school meals weren't going to go hungry. Alison Johnson has been working really hard to focus on the needs and interests of NHS and care workers, and I've been working with Andy Whiteman on some of the issues affecting the private rented sector, trying to make sure that everybody in Scotland is in a secure place to live, that nobody faces losing their homes. We already know that there have been people receiving notice to quit from private landlords, and I'm quite certain that there are good, responsible landlords out there who are being as flexible and supportive as they can, especially those who are enjoying a mortgage holiday. But not all landlords are like that, and we know that people are vulnerable and scared. So in the next few days, we're going to see emergency legislation go through the Scottish Parliament, and we hope that it's going to address many of these issues, including a complete ban on evictions during the course of this crisis. And all of our MSPs and our councillors as well around the country have been working to respond to people's individual needs and concerns, in particular challenging bad behaviour and supporting good behaviour by employers. Many employers are doing whatever they can to make sure people have social distancing at work if they're continuing to do essential work, and recognising that a lot of work is not essential or can be done from home, and supporting people to do that. But some employers, as we know, have been behaving unscrupulously throughout this situation. This extraordinary, unprecedented time is going to expose some of the brokenness that's in our economy, the unfairness, the inequality, and the exploitative behaviour of a great many, particularly big employers. We need to make sure that we learn as much as we can through this and take those lessons forward so that the society that emerges at the other side of this outbreak will be a better, stronger, fairer and more resilient one. I think we've seen people really reeling from this crisis, but we've also seen people rising to the challenge as well. And we've seen some extraordinary political action. We've seen that it is possible to house the homeless when the will is there to do it. It is possible to support people who lose their incomes when the will is there to do it, when the sense of urgency is brought to that challenge. And it's possible to invest together in our shared priorities. All these things and more are possible. And it's only because a great many people have recognised the urgency of this immediate challenge that we've shown what we are capable of when we do act with that shared collective will. That's something that we can't afford to forget when this situation is over. For the time being, I want to answer some of the questions that you've been sending in, and I'm going to start with a couple two that are quite related. One from Karen Kirk is asking whether we understand how difficult it is to try and claim universal credit. Karen says, I've watched a relative phoning, lines engaged, phone going dead, trying online, and the huge barriers and challenges to that. I absolutely recognise that, and I think both the UK and the Scottish Government need to ensure that the systems are simpler. And the related question to this is from Alison Clark. This seems like a good time to trial a national basic income payment. Is the basic income idea still being considered? The UK Government has put in place measures to support people's incomes. They've done it, generally speaking, too late, especially most recently for self-employed and freelance people. And a lot of the insecurity, the bureaucracy, the complexity of the system, the incredible hoops people have to jump through, a lot of those were already there. Things like statutory sick pay being so low, that was already unacceptably low compared with neighbouring countries. And it's only because so many people are having to go through this system, so many people being forced to jump through hoops that other people were already being faced with, that more and more people have seen how unacceptable that situation is. A universal basic income would have been the cleanest, simplest and perhaps fastest way to address people's needs, to make sure that everybody had enough income to get by. The UK Government didn't take that approach. We can continue to advocate for it, but at the moment they've put all of these individual measures in place, whether that's around universal credit, whether it's around statutory sick pay, whether it's around the furlough scheme and an equivalent scheme for self-employed people, which isn't going to pay out for months yet. It would be impossible, I think, at the moment for the Scottish Government to retrofit all of that and turn it into a universal basic income. But I think one of the clearest arguments that has to come from this experience is to say, people living with this insecurity, that's not an acceptable way for our society and our economy to be. If people do have individual examples of problems that they're having accessing these systems, do please drop an email either to one of us, your Green MSPs, or to whoever your local constituency MP or MSP is. People should be able to get that help, and hopefully your local representatives of all political parties will be working hard to try and support you through that. There was a question in from Hazel McIver. Should the COP happen in Glasgow as planned in light of calls for it to be postponed? The climate conference in November this year was going to be the biggest event that we could have conceived of in relation to the climate emergency. And it's interesting the way that that rhetoric of emergency has been used around the climate crisis for quite a long time, right across the political spectrum. But we've not seen emergency action in in response to it. We've seen continued slow incremental action. The conference this year was supposed to be a massive event, not just inside the conference with many, many thousands of people, but outside the conference as well. There would have been a huge number of big gatherings, activism, protests, to try and make sure that we influence the outcome for the better. Really, nobody knows whether a conference will happen, whether a COP will happen. And in the run-up to these events every year, there's a series of smaller events around the world where a lot of the work that goes into the COP itself gets done in advance. We don't know whether those will happen. Very clearly, the climate emergency, because it is an emergency, an existential threat based on the way that we live, that can't cease to be addressed because we're living through this equally urgent emergency. But equally, I think we can't imagine that the COP will be unaffected. I don't know whether a climate conference will happen. If it does, it's clearly going to have to use technology much more, better than I was using it earlier. Try and make sure that fewer people have to travel and be in the same place. And we don't know what the condition will be in terms of the scale of the pandemic. Will it have passed completely? Will we already have a vaccine by then? What will the situation of our economy and our society be? We just don't know. So I don't know what will happen in terms of the COP. I think we can all be certain it won't be unaffected. But at the same time, we can't allow the issue of the climate crisis just to be ignored, just to be forgotten about. The work that we have to do as a society to survive and to get through this pandemic is extraordinary. But we do that because we believe in the future. We want the next generation to have a decent future. Well, that won't happen if we only deal with one of these crises, with one of these emergencies. We have to respond to them both. Let's look at some of the other questions that might be coming in here. The process, can I explain the process for the emergency legislation that will take place next week and what the Green MSP's role will be in? That's come in from Gillian. So there's already been one piece of emergency legislation, that was UK emergency legislation. And because it dealt with some devolved issues, it was passed in the UK Parliament, but there was a legislative consent motion, a vote of MSPs, do we agree to it? And I think as people know, that whole mechanism of consent has kind of broken down in recent years. A lot of the Brexit stuff has been imposed without the consent of MSPs. But everybody recognised that this issue, this emergency, can't be allowed to turn into that kind of game of political football. So while there were important points made in the chamber when we debated the consent motion, every MSP present did agree to it. Now, some of the issues that we were raising were around things like that legislation should have raised the level of statutory sick pay instead of just expanding the range of people entitled to it. It should also, for example, there's a scheme for emergency volunteers and remuneration for those who lose income by volunteering. Well, that could have been open to those who've already lost their incomes. That could have been a way of increasing the pool of volunteers, but also replacing the income of people who had lost their jobs before the furlough scheme and so on were in place. So there were a range of ways that legislation could have been improved. Now the Scottish Government will also be working on its devolved emergency bill. Now I don't know if that's finally been published yet. The last time I checked last night, it hadn't been published in its final form. But the Scottish Government has been working with the opposition parties to talk through what's going to be included there. I think we can hope to see measures on the issue of evictions that I spoke about earlier. We'll be keen to make sure that goes as far as it possibly can. I don't want people in Scotland living through this situation with the threat of eviction hanging over them, even if that's extended for a while. I don't want to see tenants in the private rented sector coming through this with unpayable debts at the end of it. Just stacking up more and more rent arrears is not a way through this. If we want people to be in a decent situation at the end, when we're able to stand down from the lockdown, the kind of emergency situation that we're in at the moment, if people are returning to life, to work, I don't want them to be facing that with huge unpayable debts. And there are other organisations who've been campaigning for particular issues to be included. For example, some of the organisations that are active campaigning for reproductive rights have said that the legislation should be taken as an opportunity also to make sure that access to abortion isn't undermined because of this. Things like making sure that medical abortion pills can be taken at home instead of having to take them in the presence of a doctor. At the moment, you can take the second one at home, but not the first. And the 2-doctor signature rule has also been challenged as well. So there'll be a range of areas where the government has its plans, opposition have their ideas about how to improve it, and a great many other people in society will be feeding in their proposals for change. Normally, with a piece of legislation, that process takes months. It's going to have to be done in a few days this time. So once again, if you have concerns about what should be in there, what you're not hearing yet, do please drop us an email, either to ourselves, your Green MSPs, or get in touch with any of your local representatives, or email the Scottish Government directly. You'll be able to find more of that on both the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Green Party website over the next few days. Let's look at any more questions coming in. Okay, one says, this is James Hall, is saying bike shops are staying open. The Transport Minister says active travel will become the new normal. Are we about to see a major rethink of travel and how the Greens influence the process? Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, very few people would have necessarily expected that we could change the way we move about, that we could make working from home such a big issue, and that, recognising that a huge amount of aviation actually isn't hugely necessary. Greens have been making the case for changing the way we travel, and actually reducing travel demand for a long time, as well as increasing active travel. And very often government rhetoric from both governments sounds about right, but then doesn't follow through. Well, now, because of this situation and the fact that it's just not safe to move about in the way that we were before, people are recognising that different solutions are possible, different ways of living are possible. I think the fact that both governments are now talking about that kind of change, we need to hold them to account. We need to make sure that we're not carrying on with spending billions on ever more road capacity. And I certainly think we should feel pretty sickened when a billionaire like Richard Branson argues for a taxpayer bailout for the aviation industry. These are people who've been extracting profit by vast amounts by the way that they do their operations, or the way they run their business, and now they're demanding, him from his private island, demanding taxpayers' money to bail him out, while he's intending not to pay his staff as well. So there's a real sense of what the economics are. Is there economic justice in our transport system, or is it just throwing ever more money at these giant businesses while generating the pollution that will put our whole future at risk? If there's an opportunity to change the way that we move about, not just for the weeks and months ahead because of the virus, but actually because some of the changes that come out of this might be for the better, might improve the health of our planet, the health of our people, we absolutely need to make sure that we're looking at that. Let's see what else is coming in at the moment. As a party, we'll have an unprecedented opportunity to say we can't just go back to how things were, and as a country, we'll have an unprecedented opportunity to do something. So this is from David White. Before things return to the lethal normal, David describes it as. How are we going to push for that? Well, absolutely. This extraordinary situation, I think everybody understands it will change a huge amount. Someone described it this morning as the Overton window has been smashed. This notion of what is politically possible all of that is being rewritten, and we know that our society and our economy will be different when we come finally to the other side of this pandemic. What kind of difference will that be? Well, right at the moment, there is huge political consensus on making sure that we address the immediate urgent need. And that consensus has to be solid. We have to make sure that we're responding as a society to the immediate urgent need, particularly things like protecting our NHS. But it's interesting to see right-wing politicians standing outside their doors applauding the NHS after having imposed years of austerity on our public services. And it's going to be an interesting debate when we come to the other side of this. What are the changes? If our society is going to be different, how will it be different? There will be those. I think we need to be conscious of this even now. It's not too soon to be aware of the dangers. There will be those who will want to double down on the economy as it was before, who will say, we need to get back to business as usual. We need to refloat the previous economic model. There'll be those saying that, austerity was necessary, an unfortunate necessity in order to pay off the public debt after the last economic crisis. And they'll say the same thing is necessary now in response to the economic choices that have been made. There'll be those who say that employers need to have the flexibility of things like zero-hour contracts and low regulatory standards. I don't think that agenda is possible. I don't think it's acceptable. I don't think it's something that we need to accept. And one of the interesting things that we're actually seeing is more and more people at the moment rediscovering the power of working collectively. We've seen a number of employers having to backtrack from initially saying that they were just going to lay people off or that they were going to force people to carry on working in unsafe environments. They've been forced to backtrack because their employees have got together, banded together and shown the power of collective action. I think that some of the unions have been playing a really important role here, not just in standing up for their members, but in standing up for the collective power of employees in general, making sure that they are working in the interests of all people in the workplace, not just those who are already union members. If we can make sure that we're really showing to a generation of young people, many of whom didn't necessarily see union membership as something that was relevant to them, if we can show why it's important to have that kind of collective power, we can rebalance power in the economy. We can make sure that the economy we build for the future will be a better one, a fairer one that's more resilient. It's unacceptable to have people knowing that their incomes are insecure, can be taken away at a moment's notice without a redundancy package, without any protection, that their homes are insecure, that they can lose their home in the private rented sector for pretty much no reason. It's unacceptable to have people living with that level of insecurity. And I think this crisis shows very clearly why that kind of insecurity is unacceptable. So we need to make the case as strongly as we can why a fairer and more equal society is also going to be a stronger and more resilient society in the future. Now this outbreak, I hope, will pass soon, but many experts are suggesting it could become a seasonal virus, or something that recurs from time to time. Well, if we start to see the peak pass, if we start to recover, and if the lockdown rules can be relaxed or lifted, we still need to be conscious that this kind of situation could come again, this kind of outbreak could come again, and we need people to have the economic security to be able to face that situation if it does come back. So building an economy that's fairer and more equal absolutely has to be one of our top priorities. Let's see what else is coming in here. So what's the rules regarding businesses who say they are essential but fail to provide proper social distance? Local police said that there is none, and to take it up myself which I have, but I've received no reply. That's from Kev Thomas. So the police are operationally separate from government and from Parliament. That's always been the case, and it's still the case even during this emergency. So operational decisions, what resources do the police deploy, how do they engage with a particular situation, that's something they have to be and should be politically independent of. They're not under direct control in that way. So it will depend on the local circumstances how the police deal with a particular situation. If you have urgent concerns, do please get in touch, either with us or with another MSP or MP. Every employer should be making sure that they're only asking people to go to work for essential work. That doesn't mean essential to their own business. It doesn't mean essential for their profitability. It means essential work for the country. Things like care work, keeping our NHS and public services and the emergency services going, as well as some of the businesses that are providing food, hygiene supplies, things that are essential to the country in the current situation. Any business that's expecting people to come to work, you know, I've heard of debt collection agencies, I've heard of people doing sales calls and stuff. That should not be happening. And those who want to continue working must provide the option to do it from home. So any employer that's flouting those rules, that's expecting people to come into work, that's not respecting people, or actually that's refusing to access the furlough scheme, making sure that people can have their incomes protected, any employer like that needs to be called out. So do please get in touch with us with specific examples if the stuff that comes up. Got another one coming in here from WhatsApp. Is it time the BBC license, TV license, should be scrapped at least for over 75s, but in general would be better for all at this crucial time? That's from Alex. There's pretty strong views about the BBC as an institution. I think it's pretty clear that it's capable of responding to a situation like this in a way that Netflix is never going to do. And I'm really glad that we don't have the kind of wholly commercialized TV situation that you see in the US. So I've always believed that the BBC, even when it's flawed, and of course it's flawed, it is bigger than the sum of its parts. I would like for the BBC to respond better than it does, better than it ever has, to the different needs of different parts of these islands, including to the clearly different political landscape in Scotland. And if the UK government wants to make the license be free for older people, it should be paying that cost rather than handing the bill on to the BBC, because that's just a way of degrading the quality of services that we all get. But at a time like this, communication and access to entertainment at home is more important than it ever has been before. It's not just a nice to have. It's something that's going to keep us all connected to each other and keep us all emotionally capable of coping with the situation. So I do think that the BBC and the principle of public service broadcasting that's funded not by taxation and not by advertising, but by a system like the license fee, I think it's better than the alternatives that have ever been proposed. But certainly this needs to be a time when, as I said, every part of our society and our economy is going to be changed by this. Broadcasting will probably be changed by this. And I suspect we're also going to see very many people creating their own content, if you like, and sharing that on social media, being creative and sharing their creativity with others. And I hope that that's something that enriches all of our lives as well. Okay, let's see what else is coming in. What are the actions that we can take? This is from Chris. In the next few months to promote the green policies that Scotland needs and to ensure that green candidates are elected to Holyrood to deliver them. Well, yeah, I mean, we have a Holyrood election in just over a year's time. I think inevitably everybody's thinking about the immediate situation now. No one's really in the election mode that we maybe all expected to be in. Around the turn of the year, when this issue hadn't really come onto our radar yet, only just being discovered in China, this virus, everybody was gearing up for a year of electioneering. That's all out of the window, but it will come back, and we need to make sure that as a party we're going to be capable of maintaining contact with our members and supporters around the country. It's going to be interesting to see how our branches do that. How do our branches manage to maintain a connection with people when they can't have physical meetings, when they can't go out door to door canvassing and being part of the community with things like public meetings and events and debates. I think we're all going to have to be creative at using social media to keep the party functioning well, to keep us talking to one another. I know that the parliamentary group is doing that because we're all working remotely from home almost all the time. But I think our local branches are doing that as well. Most people are not going to want to start being asked about how they're going to vote in the next election because there's an immediate question of not just resilience but actually survival. So all of us, I think, need to slightly put our electoral ambitions to a side for a little while. But yeah, that will come back again, and we are still a democracy. It's going to be hugely important for our society to keep reminded that we are still a democratic society. We're not going to live in a kind of emergency conditions forever, and our democratic debate is going to be relevant to those questions about what kind of society emerges. How do we learn the lessons of what we've come through and make sure that we become a stronger and fairer society so that we're more prepared for these kind of situations in the future. So yeah, we need to be looking at the achievements that I was talking about earlier around trying to make sure that people can meet their needs with less travel demand, be more secure in their homes, protecting people from evictions, and looking at making sure that we protect people's incomes. We need to be taking these ideas and these lessons into the next election and making sure that we put together a package of policies that will convince people that Scotland can be that fairer society. We've talked as well in the past about the Green New Deal, and Greens around the world have been saying for a long time that Green New Deal, that new economic model, is a response both to the social justice crisis that we see, the inequality crisis, and the climate crisis as well. I think we've got a lot of work to do to think about how we develop our own economic proposition in terms of rebuilding our society, rebuilding our economy after this outbreak has passed. Everybody in the party needs to be welcome to take part in that discussion and to feed into it. And I think over the coming weeks and months, we'll probably be able to have a lot more to say about how we're going to use technology to keep us all connected, keep us all debating, and make sure that we're contributing to the development of those ideas ahead of our main party conference in the autumn, which I hope will still be able to take place. The development of our policies for the next election is, as it always has been, a democratic process within the party, and your ideas will be absolutely central to making sure that we develop those in a way that's in keeping with the Green Party you want us to be. Okay, I've had another ping here from another question. Okay, back to the screen. Where are we? The exams being cancelled this year and results being given by different measures, will that put thousands of young Scots at a disadvantage when applying for further education? Well, the answer is that education, further and higher education institutions absolutely need to be responding in the most open way that they can with what their plans are going to be. They're going to be in a place to make decisions about how they recognise the situation that people have gone through, how they make sure that those educational opportunities are not closed off to people. And it's one of the things that I'm sure we'll be debating next week when Parliament returns for one day to pass that emergency legislation. Ross Greer is leading on education for us, so if you have specific concerns or issues that you want to raise, do please get in touch with us by email. Okay, I think we've gone through all of the questions that I've got in front of me at the moment. There's a general one here about what powers the Scottish Government has, and I think I've run through some of those issues, the stuff that's going to come up in the emergency legislation next week around housing, around making sure that we're protecting the most vulnerable. I've got another couple of questions that have come in here. Is electric vehicles the most ethical way to solve air pollution? What about hydrogen vehicles? Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, this situation, this crisis is going to change a huge amount about our society, including how we move about and how much we move about. And one of the failings of transport policy in recent years has been the refusal to engage with traffic volumes. Electric vehicles will have a role to play. Hydrogen will probably have a role to play. Active travel, public transport, those are technologies we've had for a long time. We don't need new products on the marketplace in the same way as electric vehicles. We just need to use stuff like public transport and active travel and make our society a safer place for people to make those choices. But we also need to reduce traffic demand. We need to reduce, as the Scottish Government's own Infrastructure Commission has already recommended, we need to reduce traffic demand because replacing all the cars on the road with electric vehicles, doesn't actually make our roads safer for people to walk and cycle in, and it's also going to be a huge energy drain as well. The energy input needs to come from somewhere, and we're always going to have to be thinking about, is that actually the best way to use what renewable electricity we can generate is to power ever more road miles. Reducing that traffic demand can make our society a safer and happier place to move about, but it can also make sure that we're investing in our local economies as well. And I've had another ping on the phone here. What provisions are the Greens contemplating for disabled people in situations where motorised access is limited for environmental reasons? I don't use a mobility scooter. This is from Catherine. She said, I don't use a mobility scooter but rely on a car to travel any distance. I've not seen anything in your proposals for people with disabilities and hope that you're planning arrangements. Well, I mean, much like what I was saying earlier, if we reduce traffic demand, if we reduce the unnecessary take-up of road space, that's going to benefit everybody who does actually have to use a car. And I don't think anyone, I don't think even the most fervent cycling activist in the world would say that nobody needs to use a car. Cars have an important role to play, as do other motorised vehicles, and in particular for disability access. But if the roads are quieter, if the roads are safer, if there are fewer cars on the road, that's going to benefit people who genuinely have that need. And as we see in many towns and cities at the moment, many more parking restrictions and parking charges. Those also have a role to play, but there need to be exemptions for people who genuinely have no option but to use a car. And do we advocate a carbon tax to replace income tax, where those with the biggest carbon footprint pay the most and those with the least receive a rebate? Carbon tax is a really interesting one. Environmental taxes generally, they can play a really important role in changing behaviour, but a tax whose purpose is to change behaviour, you can never really rely on it to generate the revenue for public services, because if it's successful in changing behaviour, then the tax base reduces and the tax revenue decreases, and you'll have less for the public services. So they have a role to play, but we need a broad tax base, not just taxing one thing, taxing income, taxing wealth, environmental taxes, taxing land, a whole host of these things. That doesn't mean taxing ever more, but having a broad tax base so that you're not just relying on one thing. On the other flip side of the argument, some people have argued for abolishing council tax and replacing it with another income tax. Well, that would just increase property prices. If we take away taxation from property wealth, it will recapitalise. It will effectively increase property prices and housing costs. So when you take anything away from the tax system, if you take something totally out of the tax base, the consequences are often much more damaging. So environmental taxes, resource taxes, pollution taxes do absolutely have a role to play, but it has to be part of a broad tax base that makes sure that we're balancing those environmental objectives with social and economic objectives, including funding our public services. Listen, I think that's probably all the questions that have come in for now. So I think we'll wrap it up there. I just want to remind you, Lorna Slater, our other co-leader, will be back here again tomorrow doing the same thing. So if you've got other questions that I haven't managed to get to, there have been a few coming in, but I've tried to deal with everything that I've had on the screen in front of me. If you've got other questions, hopefully there'll be a chance for you to have those answered. If you do have specific issues, whether it's your landlord, your employer, problems that are happening in your local community, do please get in touch with your local representatives. That could be one of us, it could be your local councillor, it could be your MP, your MSP of any political party. Their offices are closed, quite rightly, and people are working from home, but that work is still happening, and we've got a role to play in making sure that we challenge bad exploitative behaviour and support those who are behaving responsibly. For the time being, stay safe, stay well, stay at home, and I hope you all manage to find some way in this bizarre, frightening situation to explore the ideas about what the future can hold, and stay involved with the party, because we need your ideas for the future as well. So thanks very much for joining me, and we'll see you before too long. Thanks very much.